cold crashing and then filtering, and then are you sorbating, or what are you doing?
We did for a little while, only because, we went from not doing anything to trying to just cold crash and sulfite. That still didn't guarantee
Sulfite.
anything.
Yeah, I said sorbate, didn't I?
Then we thought, you know what, let's bring in filtration. So we started using a plate and frame filter, filtering everything down to sterile, filtration on the plate and frame, and then sulfiting still. Then we still had a recipe, start to re-ferment. And then we thought, all right, well, there's got to be something that I'm not thinking of. So I started talking to people who are smarter than I am, basically. And I spoke to a local winery the owners and the winemakers, a club member of ours. I spoke to Mike Fall. I spoke to Scott Labs, and basically all three of them gave me the same advice, that I need to implement cartridge filtration. So when you get to cartridge filtration, it's you can get to what's considered absolute filtration, which is literally 99.999% effective. So in order to even get there, you have to have your product already sterile filtered. So basically what we started doing was we would cold crash at our final gravity. We would filter everything down to sterile filtration through our plate and frame, which even sterile filtration with the plate and frame filter is at best only 70% effective. That's why we were still experiencing some issues. So after sterile filtration on plate and frame, then we actually sulfite basically a day before we bottle, and we pass it through 2 cartridge filtrations, one of which is rated at 95% or more effective, and the second one is the absolute filtration, and it goes right into our bottle. And even from the other side, all of our bottles are being rinsed with the sulfite citric acid solution, and even our bottling line was cleaned, rinsed, sanitized, and then steam sterilized. I mean, what I said before, we literally can't do anything else at the meadery. We really can't. But so when we applied the cartridge filtration, though, we started adding sorbate, so that way we could stay a step ahead in case, for whatever reason, the advice I got from 3 different people that definitely know more than I do didn't work out. At least we were still a step ahead by adding the sorbates, because that would have been my next step. So we did that for a good 8 to 10 months, and still to this day we haven't had any issues or any kind of signs of anything happening. So we started stepping away from the sorbating. Basically, if you're doing cartridge filtration, absolute filtration, there's zero need for using potassium sorbate. But if you're not going to do cartridge filtration, which at home is not really realistic, sorbate is going to be your best friend. But if you use sorbate, you have to use sulfite as well, though.
Interesting. So
Right.
So let's point out the elephant in the room. There are a lot of people that say that filtering to that level removes some of the flavor esters, etc., from the mead. What's your thoughts on that?
That's total bullshit.
Okay.
It's been proven. It's been
Exactly.
proved by UC Davis
Okay.
that even at sterile filtration levels, even down to 0.25. I mean, sterile filtration is considered at 0.45
Okay.
because your smallest yeast cells are going to be at your 0.5 micron level. So 0.45 is your sterile filtration micron size, but even down to 0.25, which would be considered ultra sterile filtration, that you would get if you're using cross-flow filtration, for example.
Uh-huh.
Even at that micron size, every single molecule that makes up mouthfeel, flavor, and aroma passes through, is way, way smaller than a 0.25 micron and passes right through the filter.
Nice.
Two things are going to happen. That probably a lot of people that feel that filtration is stripping any kind of flavor, aroma, or mouthfeel. You gotta understand too. Even if you don't filter and you bottle, the mead or any kind of a product that you bottle is going to go through some kind of what they call bottle shock. If you're filtering, it's also going to go through a filter shock. So it's going to take a few days. Sometimes it could take a few weeks for that mead to kind of come back together. you're really kind of like separating everything out as it's going through the filter, and then you're gonna wait sometimes up to a few weeks for it to kind of all kind of come back together. It's it's almost kind of like how a lasagna tastes better the next day. It's had time to kind of sit and all those flavors meld together. It's just kind of the same concept where it's going to take days or weeks. So if you're going to taste something immediately after bottling it or filtering it, or both even at the same time like we do for our final stages, it's not going to taste the same as before you filtered it. But give it a little time, it will come back together.
Cool. Okay, so the next logical question then would be, you can do this, and you've got a fancy plate filter and then your other filtering system, but can somebody do this at home? Can they get to this level at home? Is that possible without spending $1 gazillion?
No. You could buy a like 10-inch cartridge filter for home use. I mean, they do sell the 10-inch cartridge filters. It's a lot cheaper than using like the 30-inch systems that we do. When I say systems, it's not that complicated. It's all manual basically. It's just valves, a cartridge housing, and a cartridge filter. That's all really it is. So you could definitely do it at home, but at least a 10-inch cartridge filter housing would be.
That's what I do, Sergio.
A little bit more.
I use
a little more economical. Yeah.
Yeah, I use a 10-inch cartridge filter, and I use I think it's a polypropylene from Presque Isle Wine is where I get the cartridges, and they even have them down to like 0.2, but it's a nominal, it's not an absolute, so it's never going to be sterile filtration. So you can get a really brilliant, beautiful looking mead, and I hadn't filtered for a long time because I thought, well, finings work fine. I use the super clear and it works fine, but then I started filtering, and I'm like, wow, that's beautiful to look at. And it definitely does not affect the flavor or aroma. I've won medals with my filtered meads, and they look beautiful in the glass. But you really can't do the sterile filtration at home the way that you can do it at a commercial level.
So, Tom, what are you doing?
You can.
Go ahead.
You can. It just all depends on the actual filter media itself. So, again, like you pointed out, you're using a polypropylene cartridge filter, which, like you said, is considered a nominal filtration. You could actually just get a polyether sulfone cartridge filter, and that is the actual absolute filtration membrane. But even before, when I said you could a 10-inch cartridge filter would be a little bit more economical. When I mean economical, you're still talking just for the housing itself, like $595. I actually just looked it up right now. I mean, it's not cheap at all, even at with the 10-inch housing. But
yeah,
I mean, it is possible to do it at home. It's just not
cheap. Yeah. Okay, so Ruben on the chat, which they're asking Sergio if you're on the chat, is asking, what about mini jet type filters? What do you guys think of those?
They're good. I mean, you could get down to your 0.45 micron level with them, but again, that's just. All a mini jet filter is a plate and frame filter on a very smaller scale. That's really all it is. You're passing it through filter pads. It's nominal filtration, so there's again, even at sterile, you're only going to get at best 70% effective. It's better than not filtering at all. Don't get me wrong, but it's not going to guarantee anything. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay, and then. Dingirth, who came in from the Got Mead forums, welcome Dingirth, says, when filtering that small, take out pollen. Okay, Tom, you're the beekeeper.
So, there's the pollen that is in the honey, there's a small amount.
One of them anyway. Sorry.
Yeah, assuming that it's an unfiltered and only strained honey, there's going to be a little bit of pollen in the honey, but when it comes down to it, it's not a lot. Most of the flavor that you're getting from the honey and the mead is not from the pollen. And honestly, once everything settles out, when you find the mead or you just allow natural sedimentation to occur, not only the yeast is fermenting out, but all the proteins and everything else. So all the pollen is going to be in your leaves anyway, and you're going to rack it off of there as a home brewer. So the pollen, it really isn't adding a lot of the flavor to your mead. Ultimately, whatever pollen is in the honey that you're using.
Okay.
So filtering really wouldn't make a difference, whether you're the filtering is more for clarifying and then for stabilization if you're filtering small enough.
Okay. All right, and then Joey's asking. All right, Bobby, did you have anything to add to the pollen comment?
No, that was perfect.
Okay. And then Joey's asking, Schramm's book recommends stabilizing with just sorbate, not sulfite. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, actually just reply.
Oh, yeah. I see that, Sergio.
Yeah,
I got that far down yet.
Yeah. Basically, in very short form, if there's any kind of...
Except you said sorbet.
Oh, yes.
Damn you, Otto.
Now we know why it tastes like
It's
that.
a sorbet.
You should never use sorbet without sulfites.
Never drink and post.
It's... and I'm drinking a 14% today, too. It's if you use sorbate without sulfites, you risk the off the top of my head, I can't really remember the actual chemical breakdown. But long story short, in short form, it's the sorbate will end up breaking down, and it's going to break down regardless, actually, even on its own. But with this, if it breaks down without any sulfites, if there's basically, it's going to break down into what you would characterize, like I mentioned in the post, it's into like a rotten geranium flavor and aroma. I forgot the actual chemical breakdown that.
It's geraniol. There we go. Geraniol. Yeah, there you go. You got it. And it can happen from some of the certain bacteria too, like lactobacillus can do it, Enococcus can do it. Some of the malolactic bacteria can do it.
Yes.
And you can get that sorbate flavor that is not broken down into that. Like if you overused it, it's almost sort of like a bubble gum type of thing.
Yeah.
Supposedly, I've not overutilized it. But the other thing is, if you use sorbate with sulfite, it's more effective. So you don't have to use as much sorbate as you would otherwise, and it wouldn't work anyway by itself. But you can use less. And similar, if the alcohol level is higher in your mead or your wine, you don't have to use quite as much sorbate because the alcohol has some static effects to the yeast also to prevent the re-fermentation.
Yeah, if there's any kind of...
You always use them together, basically.
Yeah, if there's any lactic bacteria, it's... any chance of lactobacteria being in that mead or in that bottle or on the inside of that cork or whatever have you, and you're using sorbate, it's going to break down to that, to those off flavors. And sulfiting is going to help prevent that from happening. Even with that, adding sorbate to a mead is going to put a shelf life on your mead. It's going to break down regardless. Maybe to not that extent of that chemical reaction that will create that rotten geranium flavor, but it's sorbate will end up putting a shelf life on your mead, essentially.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, they won't last forever with sorbate. So.
And
I
for
need
those
to go back and check some of the stuff I only use sorbate on.
Yeah, and for those of you out there
That's
that are
why
thinking,
I envy you that
go ahead, Tom. Sorry.
You don't have to use sorbate. That as a commercial mead maker, you can do sterile filtration, and you don't have to use sorbate. You have to use sulfate.
Correct. Yeah. That's why we stepped away. We added the sorbates for, like I said, 8 to 10 months, just because we were trying to stay a step ahead. But then we noticed we weren't experiencing any issues, and then with cartridge filtration, with absolute filtration, is the better method of explaining it. With absolute filtration, there's no need for potassium sorbate.
I'm totally jonesing for a cartridge filter now.
You and me both.
Yeah, no,
I have one. I just don't have absolute filters. I just have nominal filters. So.
Oh, okay. Nominal.
I just need to save for my commercial meadery someday, so I don't need to invest in more expensive homebrew toys when I can save for actual commercial toys.
So
I'm just like, you know what? Yeah.
And again, it's not necessary. It's really not necessary either. Plenty of people do not use absolute cartridge filtration process. Lots of meaderies do not use that, but that's just adding on to the deck of things that you can do. Just out of paranoia, we're literally doing everything we possibly can to prevent any issues from happening, and that's what we do.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely not necessary at all.
Okay. This is good stuff. I know there's so much misinformation out there right now, and gosh, I wish there was some way that we could like reach out and touch every single mead maker out there and say, okay, here are the basics.
Hey, don't do this. Always do this.
Always do this, yeah. And okay, these things are really necessary if you want to have a great mead. And here's how you can make that fermentation go faster. And why do you want it to be 18% again? You know.
Yeah.
Well, and you all know, I mean, it's